Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today in what is going to be hopefully a really kind of honest and brave discussion. So today's session is the next in a series of, we often do these kind of sessions, under the spotlight sessions, and today we have Arla Foods and Microsoft, and I'll introduce our guests shortly. So we're streaming live from Dubai. Obviously these are usually face-to-face meetings, this one's virtual, but the same kind of, the same premise applies. So first of all, just sort of a quick introduction. My name's Rachel Dunn. I know many of you in the society. I'm a board member of the Marketing Society, a very proud one, and I'm Deputy Managing Director for Weber Shandwick, an integrated comms agency based here in Dubai. So most of you, or some of you, hopefully, will have attended these sessions before. And really, you know, as a bit of sort of background, on Marketing Society, really our kind of aim is to really empower brave leaders. And this year's theme is Brave Together. And I think, you know, there's never been a kind of more important time to really kind of demonstrate that bravery. And today we're going to really have what we hope is going to be a relaxed, informal and an informative discussion. We've got two great guests, so I'd like to sort of introduce you, and they'll switch their cameras on and say hi. So we've got Peter DeBenedictis, who is the CMO of Microsoft. Sorry, I had it on the brain because they're one of my clients and I was doing a session. Microsoft, I apologise. I'll let Peter briefly introduce himself, but Peter's also a fellow board member of the Marketing Society with me. Has lived in the UAE for a long time and has over kind of 25 years of experience across a really kind of wide range of disciplines within marketing. So thank you, Peter. Apologies to Microsoft.
No problem, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce Sue Hubner, who is MENA Regional Category Director for Arla Foods. Sue joined Arla Foods in 2019 and previously was at Kantar and Unilever. Also has a lot of experience within kind of category and brand development in both globally and here in the region. So again, Sue, welcome, and thanks for being part of the session today.
Great to be here.
So without further ado, I think we'll kind of jump straight in. What we'd like to do is kind of really, as we said, have a really kind of open and honest conversation, really kind of delving into the background, sort of both of your backgrounds really from a career perspective, and what have been some of those kind of defining moments, and really looking into how you define brave leadership. And I guess what that brave leadership means in today's kind of turbulent times. So I think first question that I've got for both of you, I guess, you know, what would you say has been your kind of defining career moment to date? Maybe if I can ask you first, Sue.
So it's, you know, sort of 17 years of Unilever, 10 years of Kantar, and 1 year into Arla, and I'm thinking the one moment. So tough question. I would say, I guess for me, there's two I would point out, and one came very early in my career and came in the first year, I think. And I worked for quite a tough boss. I studied law and I was used to writing, you know, lots of clever stuff. And about 6 months in, he came to me and he said, you know what, I'm going to stop reading your emails because I always have to scroll down to get to what you actually want to do. So just from now on, if it doesn't fit on one page and it doesn't start with what you want to do, you know, I'm going to refuse reading them. And it's fairly blunt feedback, but it was just, for me, it was like the penny drop that, you know, it wasn't about how clever you are, or, you know, and he said, I want to know so what. And this so what has always stuck with me, because it's like, you know, always ask yourself, so what? And my team are possibly quite sick of this now, because I've integrated it so much that I use it myself a lot with them. But I think so what was a defining moment for me early on in my career. And then I think the second one I would say was a bit later. It's when I landed in Dubai, and I went from you know, managing a team to managing kind of a team that was split across Dubai, Istanbul, and South Africa, and a fairly widespread sort of MENA region across a fairly widespread category to manage on skin with 5 global brands and several local brands. And the defining moment was when I got to sort of, close to burnout really after my first year, because it was just too much. And I reached out to a couple of mentors of mine, and I was like, I'm working so hard, and I've built a good reputation up to now being a good marketeer. What is it that I'm doing wrong? And that's the second penny that dropped, which is that at some stage that you no longer you can't drive the content to such a level of detail anymore. You have to you're there to inspire people and give them direction and energy. That is your role, and so it was that sort of step up into actually just focusing on people and committing to the people in your team and making sure that they do the great work, not that you're doing everything, involved in everything. So those would be my 2 defining moments, I think.
I love those, and thank you for jumping straight in and addressing those. I think you're right. I think there's some real learnings there. The so what, the so what question is so important. Just really kind of getting straight to the, being able to sort of articulate, I guess what you make your point clearly and get that across to somebody else. And I think also that, as you say, that point in your career, where you sort of have to take a step back and not feel like you're responsible for all the detail, but to be able to sort of, as you say, give that direction and energy, and sort of channel the rest of the work through your people. I think there's some really great learnings there. Peter, can I kind of put the same question to you? So kind of, I guess, one or more, but what would you say would be the sort of a defining point in your career?
Yeah, I think I would say 2 things. Kind of one, it's happened 2 or 3 times, being willing to take on jobs that everyone else kind of were avoiding, sometimes like the plague, because they were hard, because the manager leading that was kind of not so fun to work with, or that the work didn't sound interesting, or that would be a slog. And every time I've done that, it's led to something else that was so much better. And so it's a little bit about taking a risk, but it's also, I think, by doing the work that no one else wants to do, you really become kind of I became different roles indispensable. Like, wow, this is a really important job. This is somebody we can count on to go get stuff done. And it started with becoming a manager of people at 28. Just about every one of my peers was 5-10 years older than me. And I've kind of been able to lead teams for the last 20 years. There was a result of taking that early risk of working for a boss who was not so great, leading a team of people who were all older than me, who knew a lot more about their jobs than I did. And so doing that a few times in my career has really, each time is a point of inflection, has really allowed me to kind of catapult and leap my career forward. So that's one thing, doing the work that other people don't want to do and taking some risks with your career, I think can pay huge dividends that I know that I didn't see around the corner, but I thought, okay, let me take a leap. And by taking a leap, maybe by the time I get to the other side, it's going to be more interesting. And lo and behold, and that's kind of how I landed my role at Microsoft. By doing a role in my previous company, which is very similar to mine, I gained a crazy amount of experience to allow me to do the role that I do today. So.
And do you think you gained a lot of that experience from taking those risks, from kind of taking on things that perhaps other people didn't want to take on? What kind of allowed you to gain such a breadth of experience?
Yeah, because I was doing things that nobody else knew how to do, because I was doing work that was perhaps was not necessarily fun. It was new. I took over new departments that kind of were out on the edge, and so I learned skills and things that other people didn't have. And by having those skills and muscles, suddenly I became a lot more valuable to the company, and ultimately helped build build things in my career that and skills and competencies that I otherwise wouldn't have. And one of them becoming a manager so young. Now I've been managing teams for over 20 years. It's just kind of a natural way of working, versus people who get into management later. It's a lot harder the later you get into management, the harder it can be to be really effective and a great leader. So yeah, I think I was just able to build muscles, learn new skills that might have taken a lot longer or might not have happened had I not done that.
Do you think, in terms of kind of bravery, because I think, you know, probably both of you, from what you've just said, there are elements where you've had to sort of be brave, whether it's taking on board some quite kind of honest feedback, you know, and then sort of acting on it, or, you know, putting your hand up and saying, yeah, I'll take that job on, and, you know, taking risks. How would you articulate bravery? You know, how, maybe Sue, you can answer that one first.
Bravery involves risk, obviously, because if there's no risk, then you're not being brave, right?
Yeah. So
it's either a really big risk, or it's one where you know, it could be high risk to the company, or it could be high risk to you personally, right? Because you're sticking your neck out, that wonderful English expression, which means you might get it chopped off, right? So I think you know, this feeling that you're going out to do something where there's no trodden path. You can't kind of call in and say there's a million people who've done this before, and there's a nice, you know, trodden path and things you can follow. But it often involves uncertainty and risk. And I think the real brave things is, I mean, we in Unilever we used to say it's a big hairy objective. So if you have something that you're going to take on, which is like, wow, you know, you're either going to do it, you know, have a fail big, or you know, or have a really big success. So in my career, I was working in Central Eastern Europe on Dove, and you know, Nivea Blue Tin, which is the heartland of Nivea, it's the cream that everybody knows, was killing us, and it was a cash cow for them. But in Dove, we'd never really taken them on head on, because, you know, we were selling lotions and other things, and in Central Eastern Europe, because, you know, the income was less, you know, I kind of stuck my neck out in that sense and said, I think we need to really take them on and try at least once. And so that was an area where I remember I drove that, and it was quite scary. And I think you know, you're being brave when you're scared, basically. And so yeah, and we did launch it, and we were relatively successful. We did bite a chunk out of them, which was nice. Obviously, you're never going to dethrone someone that has built a heritage over years, but it was deemed a success at the end. But I know throughout that journey, it felt quite scary. And when you take risks, you will always have people who will convince you that this risk is too big, or it's not the right thing to do. And it's easy to turn around and say, okay, well, let's not. And I think sometimes that for me is bravery, is if you feel you know, you're continuing on something that is that feels a bit scary, but it feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah. Do you think there's an element, I mean, we'll move to you, Peter, but do you think there's an element also of you know, sort of, as you said, I guess there's part of feel the fear, do it anyway kind of type mentality, because, you know, to not feel any fear, of course, you know, I mean, you're always going to sort of have a certain amount of that. How important do you think, I guess, failure is, and the kind of recovery from failure? Because, you know, I think that's probably quite an interesting area when it comes to bravery, you know, sort of being brave enough to be able to fail, and then, you know, sort of almost to you know, to be able to sort of learn from that and reflect on it and then move on. You know, how much has that impacted your outlook on bravery?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I think the reality is that I'm not sure I was encouraged to failure growing up. It's not something that in our family was was particularly seen as a great thing. And I think many people feel like that. And then you go into the working world, and of course you want to succeed. And I think failure is something where it's a bit of a personal journey. So you have to. Nobody plans to fail. Nobody says, "Oh, I think I might fail so I can get the learning." No one actually says that. It happens to you. You don't plan to do it. And it's more about when it happens to you, how you come back from that, and who you've got around you to help you come back from that as well. So what network have you built up, and what support have you got to digest that, work out the learnings, you know, and hopefully no irretrievable damage in that. And then just I think there's also something around, you know, sometimes if there is a failure, the worst thing you can do is cover it up, or try and pretend it wasn't there in the first place and you didn't really mean to do it, because actually it takes away from respect to your leadership. I think there's an element of course I'm not advocating to fail a lot, but I do think that looking back, sometimes the way you digest failure and you carry yourself during failure is part of leadership. And of course, none of us plan to do it.
Yeah, I think, yes, there's a lot of, I agree with that point. Peter, what would your, I guess, sort of definition of bravery, and then, kind of your take on failure and kind of what you've learned from that?
Sure. Well, there's a few folks in the chat who were asking around not to look back, but look at the present and forward. So maybe I'll define my answer in that way. I'm blessed that I work for a company like Microsoft, which is in high demand. Right now, people are all looking to connect, and they need IT infrastructure and software and solutions. So we're blessed as a company, but we have to make choices. One of the choices that we made recently is to tell our commercial teams, don't try to, we probably have 50 things that can help companies to navigate the current crisis. What we've told them is there's 4 that you should focus on. Don't go to the other 45. Just focus on 4. Make sure your customers understand that we can do these 4 things. We can do them really well. And that takes a little bit of guts, because, oh, but they want to know about this, they want to know about that. I said, yeah, but focus on these first, because they don't know what they don't know. And you can actually help paint a picture for a path for where you need to respond to the current crisis. You're going to need to recover, and then they're going to need to reimagine their business, and we can help them through that journey. But don't go to reimagine right now. You need to just help them to respond, and I think that takes a little bit of bravery, because the natural reaction is I got to throw everything in the kitchen sink at my customer and hope some of it sticks. But what you actually can do with that way, and that's not just a Microsoft thing, that's for any company, is you can confuse your customer and then they go to somebody else who actually helps simplify the complex. So that's one thing I would say that we're doing ourselves and we're doing locally within our own organizations. Let's just keep it simple for now, and we'll get to the more complex things later. And that takes a little bit of guts, because that means that potentially you're missing out on some short-term gains in a tough time, but it actually means that you can become a much more trusted partner. I think a couple of things, and this will be outside as personal experience with other organizations that I'm either a board member of or so on, is taking tough calls and taking them early and being brave and taking them. That can mean topics around staff. It can be things around cutting budgets, about investing in only the most vital things. So I can tell you, for example, we cut a whole bunch of budgets in Microsoft around lots of other campaigns that we're only going to invest here. We're going to invest in this thing because we think this is going to be the most impactful. And that means we're not going to put money somewhere else where there could be an opportunity, but we got to make a choice. In the other organizations, it's do you put staff on unpaid leave, and how do you tell somebody, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to be on the bench for a while. And the way that I've seen it done is basically say, okay, we're putting you on the bench temporarily so that the entire organization can survive in the long term, that you and your family will have a job to come back to in the long run. That's really tough in these circumstances, but being brave as a leader and tackling those topics early can help you and your organization survive. And that's hard. because employees are humans, they've got families, but you're going to sometimes have to make the right decision in the short term to preserve the long term, and that's not easy. And I can tell you, I've personally had those kind of conversations, unfortunately, quite a few times. If I go back to 9/11, go back to and the global impact that had. We've talked about the 2008 crisis. Talk about what's happening today. The one thing I would say is be brave and make decisions early, and be decisive and provide clarity on why you're doing it. People will appreciate that. The people who are being impacted and the people who are not. The budgets that are being impacted, the budgets that are not. The customers that you say, I'm not going to focus on you today, I'm going to focus on these other customers because they need more help, attention, support, and so on. And those are tough. Those are tough things to do, but in the long run, making those decisions quickly, early, and decisively will benefit everyone.
Great feedback there. Just, I think, trying to sort of tackle some of the questions, to your point, Peter, in the chat. So we might kind of jump around a bit, but I'm conscious that I want to try and address some of them. So yeah, what one thing, I think Khaled has asked that question. What one thing will you change post-COVID, either at home or in the office? Now, obviously, we're still in it, so we're still on the journey, riding the wave. But has there anything? I guess, what's the learning been so far? Is there anything in your mind that you think, I'm really going to change that, either within your team or your organization, or even on a personal level?
From a marketing mix perspective, and then I'll let Sue jump in. I think what this crisis is showing is that digital engagement from a marketing perspective works, and it works, yes, in this region. We've had some good success over time. Well, look what we're doing today, for example. But I think that we will see a permanent shift, not a complete 100% removal of in-person events, but I think we will go to a much more balanced, and particularly in B2B companies where events typically can be anywhere between 60 and 80% of a marketing mix. I think we'll go to a much more digital mix than we've had before. Webinars like we're doing today, one-to-one engagements, one-to-few, 1 to 10,000 digitally versus having to host an in-person event, because the world has suddenly got used to engaging like we're doing today, and it's not actually too terrible. Actually, generally the technology has gotten so good. Not necessarily this technology, but some technology has gotten so good that you can have a really rich experience with somebody and not necessarily have to be in the same room. So I think that from a marketing perspective, that's the one thing that this crisis has shown, is that digital engagement works, and that digital engagement will be a much more prevalent way of engaging with customers and with accounts going forward. Both from a seller perspective, from a marketing perspective, it's going to allow people to do work in multiple countries that perhaps some companies wouldn't embrace it before, and industries that you wouldn't think it was possible. For example, I know that Mark Reed came out recently and said he didn't really believe digital could work in the agency world, and yet they are doing it around the world, advertising across the entire WPP network. They're actually able to provide work to clients, and nobody's going into the office, into the studio. That's a huge shift and a disruptor for an industry. So I think this whole notion of working remotely, digital engagement, doing a job if you're not in the country where that job where the customer is necessarily domiciled, is going to become much more prevalent, regardless of the public health situation.
Thanks, Peter. Sue, what are your perspectives there? Especially interested, I guess, moving beyond even your own perspective, obviously from an individual perspective, but also within the industry that you're in. Are there any kind of changes that you would adopt from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. None of us foresaw this, of course, and it happened. It all happened quite quickly. I think there's two things. I guess there's one part, what I look at that we did early, that I'm really grateful we have in place now, So I guess you could turn the question around as like what you're really grateful that you did just before this hit you, and then what's the bit that you wish you hadn't done or you had done differently. So the first bit for me is you know, kind of echoing a little bit what Peter said, as the world's turning digital, of course, but also our consumers and the way they're interacting with brands and you know, how they consume media is completely different. And particularly in this region, we see this with the prevalence of Snapchat and KSA, and now TikTok, which has just gone through the roof. And so the adoption of these new ways of consuming media content and also therefore brand content is obviously changing very fast. And so the thing I'm grateful for is that in Arla last year, we actually progressed a business case and put in place an internal digital agency. So they reported to me. There's a bunch of 7 fantastically talented people. We call them the Barn, and they do our influencer content. They manage our you know, all our digital content, and they adapt assets from our main agency to make sure that they work with the main agency to make sure that all our assets are able to be placed on the platforms where we need to be present. And they're creative, and they're really building our connection with consumers in a huge way. And so they're in place now. And so as this from end of Q3 last year, so we had a little bit of time to actually get up and running in a normal office environment, which was I think we're all grateful for. But this group has now, you know, been invaluable, because of course in marketing terms we've had to look at all our marketing plans and say, well, are these still relevant in the current environment? Is this what consumers want to hear in terms of messages? Is this in the right place? Are we talking in the right place? And so on and so on. So, and of course we've had to be agile, and our agility has been phenomenal thanks to the fact we've got this internal setup, and we've been able to turn around things very quickly. And we're already seeing the result in engagement levels and CPEs coming through from some of the changes that we've made. So the first bit, I guess I would say, is like, I'm really grateful that was in place. We're in an industry in food, which is, you know, we're very lucky. And we're very conscious how lucky we are, because of course people still need to eat, and they've been stocking up and they're cooking more at home and baking more at home. It's become a bit of an entertainment factor. And of course our brands need to continue to talk to them at this point in time, but in a relevant way. So this digital setup has been invaluable, and I'm super grateful that we did that. I guess the other part of the question is, what do you wish you hadn't done? Well, if I'd had perfect foresight, I probably wouldn't have launched 2 new innovations just before, because yeah, it's a difficult environment to sell new food products where, you know, most people are not necessarily, it's not an environment where mentally you're terribly open to new propositions. You're actually just trying to cocoon and go back to safety and buy the brands that you know. So having, you know, if someone gave me, you know, the time again, and if I'd known this was going to happen, I would have kept those innovations up my sleeve and launched them a bit later.
Thanks for that, Sue. I think just having a look at, yeah, it's a couple of comments. I think, yeah, great points there. I think it was Margaret was saying, you know, digital meets can actually make people feel closer together. You know, so the irony is that, you know, I guess probably all of us have wandered around large trade shows or big events and probably felt pretty disconnected from the other people around, you know, so maybe yeah, that's a very valid point. Maybe we're kind of all feeling a little bit closer through some of these kind of digital events. So just having a look at some more of the comments around bravery. I guess there was a question I had as well. I'm just kind of having a look through. There's a question I had as well in terms of, if we're talking about marketing in the current time, you know, let's kind of, you know, come right to the present day. We're all kind of mid-COVID. We don't know when, you know, we don't know when we're going to kind of come out of it. And to your point, Peter, obviously at the moment it's about kind of looking at what we're doing now, looking at immediately after, and then kind of the longer term, whenever that comes. I guess I had a question on content and, you know, marketing content. Obviously, you know, we are all digitally connected, you know, more than we ever were. We're not really going anywhere, so we're all online. you know, a lot more than we probably were previously. You know, in a way that's amazing, an amazing opportunity. You know, so you've got more people cooking and baking. You know I am with my kids, you know, in the afternoons or whatever, but I guess there's also a challenge there, because there's also an increasing amount of content, you know, from more brands than ever before are creating content. There's more, you know, people are, consumers or customers are overwhelmed probably and bombarded with this sheer amount of content, you know, on so many different platforms and channels. You know, how do you kind of tackle that to still make sure that you're differentiating and reaching, you know, your audiences?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we, you know, the main thing is when you want to connect with consumers, you have to be helpful to their current situation. So the first thing is stop talking about something that might have been, you know, relevant before, but pull it. Just stop, you know, pull any advertising or any messaging that just doesn't really connect with the current situation. I also think it's been quite interesting. We've seen a lot of really nice big brand campaigns around reassurance of big brands to consumers, which is sort of a very emotional aspect of, you know, a lot of emotional advertising, which I think is great. But my personal view is you've got to follow that up with real help. So to give you an example, if you, in the food industry, if you're saying, you know, we've got a campaign on Lurpak, which we literally created within 2 weeks as part of this digital setup, and it's around, you know, where there's cooks, there's hope, because cooking is actually a hopeful activity and a very safe one. So getting to the deeper insight, not just of your butter and what adjusts to the dish, but actually, you know, where there's cooking, there's hope and there's togetherness. And obviously Lurpak is, you know, connected to cooking. So that is fantastic. And we've got a really great campaign, but this now needs to be followed up with practical help on recipes and cook-alongs and stuff, so that people can actually feel you're not just saying stuff. I think the digital thing is that you need to also follow that through with actual help, that whether, you know, the rubber hits the road a little bit, where you know, they see, oh wow, you know, and then I can log into this and I can do this recipe with my kids, and I can not just, you know, connect, but not just with big promises, but actual help.
Peter, what would your, do you have a perspective on that?
Sorry, I was answering one of the questions in the chat, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, we're just talking. I guess I was sort of, my initial question was about this, you
Content.
know, plethora of content. Yeah, and we're all being bombarded. And how do you keep kind of cutting through and reaching your audiences?
Yeah, I think it's a good one, right? Because I did a quick scan of my industry, and there was a lot of the same kind of language and content there, and so it's tough to in this world to cut through. What we're trying to do is to move away from generic messaging. You know, it's like we're in it together, and you know, sort of how can we practically help? Like, okay, if you're, you know, I'm going to use some of my own example, so apologize for that. If you're in a hospital, what are 3 things we can do to help you either connect with patients remotely? What can we do to help you be more efficient and productive while you're in a hospital ward? What are, how can you use chatbots to answer questions more efficiently so that your human staff can actually spend more time with patients? So talk a little bit about practical things that and real world scenarios that are meaningful to your customers versus kind of generic platitudes that say, you know, we're in it together, stay connected, you know, these kind of things, which are, they're good messages, but they actually don't, in a practical way, help you solve a burning customer need, which is ultimately what the value proposition of whatever organization you're part of should be the foundation of. What I do, what I produce, the service I provide solves an unmet customer need. And if you can clearly convey that, especially in these times, you have this need and I do this to help you with that, I think that will cut through versus warm, touchy things which are important, but don't necessarily help solve problems.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think we'll come on to it. There was a question, there's some questions that were before, but I think this one's particularly relevant, so we will go back and answer the other questions, don't worry. But I guess now that we're kind of moving on to I guess more sort of current advertising or current marketing, you know, and some of this kind of COVID kind of communications and whatever. I think, you know, there's a question here from Lynn about, you know, what do you think of brands changing their logos to represent social distancing? You know, do either of you kind of have a perspective on that?
You know, I think the car companies, a lot of them have done that, and I think initially that's better than advertising the latest model of XYZ out on the road, kind of. So I think the initially that's a nice response. I think it's important that to try to keep people feeling positive and to send a positive public health message, which a lot of the car companies did. I think that's a good thing. McDonald's did one. I think there's been a few great examples, like, hey, stay home, stay safe. I think that's good. That supports the public health authority's message that, hey, rather than putting my ad dollars into promoting my XYZ product, I'm actually going to try and support the public health system. I think that's responsible. But then what? You know, in the same year, kind of respond, recover, reimagine. What else are you going to bring to the table? And I think some companies have been very brave. They've shifted their factories into ventilator production. Garment manufacturers, fashion retailers have moved into providing healthcare clothing for first responders and for hospital workers. I think those are brave decisions, and they're channeling dollars that would go into pushing their products into areas, gaps in public health. I think that's brave, and the fact that they might promote that, I think is a good thing as well. Encourages other companies to do the same. So I think the answer is, as an initial response, those brands doing that, I think it's not a bad thing. But then what else can they do to be a responsible citizen to the communities that they operate in, to give, not necessarily give back, but to contribute more than just, oh, I'm going to stay in my comfort zone, I'm going to protect my P&L, and I'm not going to put myself out there to preserve it and contribute to the community.
I guess to your point, Sarah, it's the kind of so what, or it's the then what, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of after you've done that, you know, and what, that's where the substance, I guess, and the ongoing piece about being helpful and continue to sort of solve an unmet need, you know, and solve people's problems.
I would just add, I suppose, that depends a little bit also what industry you're in, because some of those industries have completely lost their relevance for the moment because no one's going to buy a car. So it's a way to keep brand saliency. It's a bit like during recession, you try and keep your brand saliency, so when you come out, you know, that oh, you know, whatever it is, I don't know a lot about cars, but Mercedes,
yeah,
or
top of mind, yeah,
are still top of mind. So I think that's a good thing to do, and as Peter said, it's a responsible message. So for them, it's just a way to stay salient. But I think in industries where you have got a role to play right now, and you know, you can make a difference. Like is it Twix, the one with the two fingers, right? And I think they did one of those, and I thought it was incredibly cute. But I also thought, yeah, but you know, you've got to do more than saliency right now, because you're food and you're snacking, and surely there's other messages that you could bring. You know, a moment of joy in the day, or I don't know. I don't work on those brands, but I just felt, you know, from my perspective in the industry I'm working in, I want more than saliency. I want meaningful and different. So there's got to be more. There's got to be actual consumer needs met.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'll come on to the Q&A shortly. There was another question I had, and it probably, this plays, I think, to quite a few people's comments in the chat as well. What's your current kind of, what's the biggest challenge that you're currently facing? So you know, it's whether it's just whether it's you as an individual, whether it's you as a leader, you know, whether it's your industry, but what is the kind of current challenge that you're currently kind of wrestling with? Lou, I don't know, either of you answer that first, up to you.
I can start. The thing I'm working on right now is what's next. We just went through a really tough March, tough in the sense that trying to close a quarter, trying to cope with all of these things happening. We had to cancel. I look after Middle East and Africa, so we had close to 100 events, small, medium, large, that we had to cancel just in March alone, plus everything for this quarter. And then we had all this investment that we had committed to the company to, and what do we do with those dollars? So kind of probably previous question, what do we do with the dollars that we have to drive the most relevant impact? And we had a couple other big projects that we had to deal with in March. So that March was very bogged down. The biggest challenge I'm dealing with now is what's next. How do you go from we simplified. The simplified part was that, okay, now how to expand and when, and how do you do that in a multi-country environment where different markets, different customers, different industries are going to start to recover and grow at much different paces and rates. And how do you have a go-to-market plan and strategy that is sensitive to where markets, customers, countries are still in respond mode, but you've got others looking to take off and they need your help, and that's a commercial opportunity. How do you balance all that out? And that is for us a really big challenge, and do it in the right way, with the right tone, the right marketing assets, with the right language that is sensitive to the fact that yes, we're going to be in a crisis probably as a region for at least 18 to 24 months. Okay, but how do you then still balance that out? The fact that you still got to pay the bills, you still have a responsibility to your business to drive impact. That's what I'm struggling with the most. Not really the here and now so much. That train is in some ways left the station. We have our plan. We know how we're going to deal with the respond piece. It's like, how do we help customers recover and stay open, and then reimagine their business? So we provide support, for example, to companies that never had any digital business at all, suddenly becoming 100% digital. How do we do that? We don't know what to do. And those are the kind of things that I'm grappling with at the moment.
Thanks, Peter. What about you, Sue?
Yeah, for us, it's kind of a story of two halves a little bit. I think all food industry has had an incredibly good quarter 1. We usually have a great Ramadan as people stock up, and but it's been a tough time nevertheless, because but it's been a tough time in other areas of the business. So the supply chain is incredibly challenged. With curfews and things coming in, van drivers getting to shops, merchandisers being able to refill the shelves. So for us, it's been quite a battle in that sense to make sure we're managing all of that. So that's less of a challenge for marketing in that sense. It's more of a challenge for the whole leadership team that I sit on, and how we make sure that our brands still, get to the retailers, and therefore to consumers and shoppers. I think it's been interesting because it's also opened up some areas like e-commerce. So we've been working on e-commerce for a while, obviously, but now obviously that's been booming. And the biggest problem now is actually fulfillment of orders. So I think anyone who's been trying to get an order, it's now 10, 18 days. So from that perspective, the limiting factor is actually the retailer fulfillment, as much as stock management and so on. There's a massive change from us now, from modern trade to traditional trade. So when this crisis first started, modern trade exploded as everybody was stocking up with 10 items of everything. That's now seemed to be massively shifting towards traditional trade. So I think our consumers and shoppers are saying, I'd rather just go to the corner shop now. And so again, there's a lot of kind of those areas that we need to look at. But as I said, that's more of a leadership team thing. We meet 3 times a week. We have a COVID meeting where we discuss and we support each other, and we make sure everyone's doing what they're meant to be doing. From a marketing perspective, I guess the biggest challenge has been to just you know, rip up the plan you've got and just start anew and say, is this, you know, work out whether you've got the right plan and what the changes that you really have to do, both from a media investment perspective and from a messaging perspective, and that's one half, which is managing this crisis kind of currently. I think, to Peter's point, I think the big question mark is now looking forward. You know, are we going into a global recession? You know, how does this bounce back? We're all reading stuff about China and Italy and whatever, about how do consumers react. Food services, of course, has had a massive hit. So do we now come back and do consumers go back and act, you know, is the new normal actually just back to normal, or what bit is new? And those things, and I think that for me at the moment is the biggest challenge, is to get to, because you have to have, nobody knows, right? So you have to have an aligned company view of what you think will happen, and then plan for that, because otherwise you're not planning at all. So you have to sort of align the leadership team behind certain hypotheses and say, this is what we think the future might look like based on what we know. And that's the challenge.
Thanks, Sue. A couple of other, just trying to get through some of the questions. You know, can't see who said this, but someone's asking about, you know, almost kind of using your crystal ball. If you could just whip it out, put it on the desk for a minute. You know, what would be your, it's a bit of a risky question really, but what would be your prediction in terms of, you know, how the marketing industry is going to change, or how it will be disrupted? I guess, Peter, you kind of talked about, you know, so digital and moving away from physical events.
Yeah, and I think that's a marketing angle. I think what Sue is alluding to as well, it's not just a marketing thing. Part of our role as marketers is to help our companies think about strategy and where to go. I think, you know, in the technology industry, they've been talking about digital transformation for quite a number of years. I think if I look at the crystal ball, no matter any company that survives is going to massively shift to a digital first company in whatever form that may take. That can be a food manufacturer needing to, you know, move into digital supply chain, digital delivery, digital fulfillment, you name it. It all will need to be digitized. Banks, governments, there will be, I can't imagine an industry that will not digitize in a rate of 2, 3, 4, 5 times what they were thinking before. A quick example of that is education. In the UAE, where many of us on this call live, the Ministry of Education onboarded 600,000 people onto digital learning in 2 weeks. That would have taken 5 years before. So education is just an example. Massive disruption digital. There will be a lot more education industry type of stories over the next 2 years as a result of the crisis. That would be my hypothesis if I had to look into the future. Sue,
what would be your take on that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think just as a very small example, the interesting thing is travel budgets. So, you know, obviously nobody's traveled. So I think all companies are going to find mid this year that they've not spent anything on travel, and they've been able to operate quite well. so that's actually going to put pressure on, why should we, you know, there will be no going back to that, I think, you know, because everyone's going to look at that and say, why did we spend that in the first place? So there will be a lot less business travel, I think, because people have found out they can cope.
Yeah, I think that's true. We're going through that as well, Sue, right? And what does our T&E budget look like next year? The one thing I counter with that is that the reason why this is also working for large companies and medium sizes is that, you know, the people are ready, so you can sustain over a longer period of time being digital, but you can't run an entire regional business virtual. At some point, people need the human connection. So we're having that argument right now, saying keep our travel budget. Okay, cut 30%, but don't cut 80%, because at a certain point in time, the floodgates will open and people will really want to reconnect. And if you cut that budget completely, then you're not gonna be able to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think there will be a lot more scrutiny, but I think people will, so it's quite interesting you mentioned schooling, and you know, the UAE have been like super impressive in this, right? So all our kids, my kids are a bit older, so they're entering A levels and stuff. But you know, if I talk to them, actually, it is actually working. They are bizarrely learning stuff, but when I talk to them, as they all say, I can't wait to go back to school. I can't wait just to be in school and be with people. So I do think it's a bit of a, so that a prediction is probably one of those where I don't think human beings will go one way completely. So I think everyone's also really looking forward to connect with their friends again. I also think people will travel again, you know, because they will want to go on holiday. So I don't think the whole world just kind of, you know, some of those needs that we had before as consumers will still continue to be there. So I think that the interesting thing is in the new normal, there's a lot of newness which is forced upon us, which if you take that away, then we'll go back to just normal. I think I've heard a lot of people say, I don't want this new normal, I just want normal. You know, I want to go back to where I was. So I think this is part of what's so difficult about, as Peter said, is we need to have a hypothesis of what we think the world will look like in the second half of the year and onwards, and what are consumers' habits going to be. So I guess I'm not very good at the crystal ball bit, but I do think it's a bit 50-50 on a lot of things. So be that school or be that
one thing that in the crystal ball side, that I've had a couple people ping me directly during the chat in college, just put a question on what job uncertainty, right? This is a kind of crystal ball, you know, and what's the advice I would give? As I mentioned, I've been through a couple of these already, and once on the wrong side of it. I think thinking about what I did, one is to be hugely open-minded to what opportunities are out there for you if you're a marketer. If you're a good marketer and you're able to clearly define a value proposition, consider a move into sales, because the marketing jobs probably will be less going over time. But all companies need people who are articulate, that can find customers and pitch a strong value proposition or product. That's a quick one. A second one is, if you're financially able, startups are, in our region, there are a lot of them, and they desperately need expertise, and it's an opportunity where you might not take 6 months out of your career in the past to go work for a startup, but you have that opportunity while you're maybe looking for the next big thing to take a bet on a startup. A, it keeps you in the market. B, it may give you a small income. It may give you something bigger later on, and you'll learn some new skills you might not have before. I've done both, and it helped massively when I was on the wrong side of a economic downturn. Those would be a couple of things I would say. And lastly, while you have a job today, which I'm personally immensely grateful for, work on your digital skills, because if that's the trend and you're traditionally very analog, you need to take this time now while you know you've got a steady paycheck to digitize yourself quickly, and not just around digital marketing, but the entire digital realm. You know, what is happening? What is AI? How does it is relevant for industry? What is cloud? What is blockchain? All of these kind of buzzwords I've been hearing, they're going to become mainstream very quickly, as I said. And it's something that if you have a job, get yourself skilled up now before something happens and you absolutely need to. So those would be 2 or 3 things that I would suggest. And there's a ton of online learning that is for free that's available out there to enable you to do that. LinkedIn has offerings. I'm not saying that just because it's a Microsoft company. We offer things. There's dozens, universities. There's a ton of ways that you can educate yourself while you have a little bit of time. Spend the time to upskill yourself while you have a role.
Agreed. I think just in closing, Sue, what would be you know, that's kind of a great, I think, you know, final piece of advice there from Peter. What, if you could kind of summarize it, you know, what would your final sort of takeaway be, your final piece of advice to sort of fellow marketers in today's climate?
Do you mean just in relation to COVID or generally? Sorry.
I think in general, you know, you might feel it's related to COVID, but, you know, sort of if you had one piece of advice, you know, that people could take away, you know, fellow marketers, what would that be?
Well, I think from a marketing perspective, always be flexible. And be agile. So, you know, if nothing else, this crisis has proved that you know, if you've got some very certain models in your head about how things work, then that's not how the world works anymore. It's forever evolving. Similar to this digital team that I have now, and you know, I'm managing people who know a lot more about digital than I do, but I knew this was the right thing to do. So you have to be agile and flexible in your mind to get to the right decisions. And if nothing else, this crisis has proven it. And I think from a leadership perspective, I would always say, just find your leadership style. You know, there is no, you know, there's a lot of books written and then people say there's 7 styles or there's whatever, but in the end, there's only your style. And if you have to be authentic to your strengths. And I think that would be my key advice on a leadership perspective.
And I think now more than ever, I think that's very relevant. Well, look, thank you both. I'm sorry that we kind of probably weren't able to touch on every single question or point. I hope we managed to sort of, you know, address some of them. I think just some of the takeaways for me, lots of great things that I think we can all kind of learn from and take away. I think, you know, this idea of kind of really making an impact by sort of, I guess, challenging yourself to kind of, to really articulate the so what, you know, factor, looking at things through that lens. I know, Sue, I kind of, I can really relate to that. You know, to your point, Peter, about sort of sometimes putting your hand up and doing some of those jobs that other people don't want to do, and then seeing where that leads you and the opportunities that can arise from that, which ultimately can lead to you sort of being indispensable. I think this idea of being genuinely helpful, so brands really kind of making sure that those messages and that content, you know, that they're kind of putting out to their audiences is really about making sure they're meeting an unmet need and really kind of being helpful and being able to back that up with some substance, you know, is very important. And I think just from a kind of individual point of view, in terms of kind of careers and sort of things that we can all learn from this this current, you know, sort of phase that we're going through, that idea of digitizing yourself, for kind of upskilling yourself, taking that opportunity to kind of learn and develop, and being, you know, agile and being able to kind of pivot and kind of and quickly change, you know, change direction if needed. So I think, you know, some great pieces of advice there. Thank you both for your time. Thanks all of you for tuning in, for being part of the conversation. You know, I hope that we can kind of keep this conversation going and have further discussions. I know some of you are on the WhatsApp group as well, so by all means, let's keep the conversation going, and stay safe. Hope you're all well. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you.